What is it about them? I must be missing something. They just keep doing nothing. Too intoxicated to be scared.
Billie Eilish has finally dropped her long-awaited debut album. When we all fall asleep, where do we go? If we look at the credits, we see only 4 names. There's Billie, Phineas O'Connell, who's Billie's brother and did most of the producing here, Rob Kinelsky on mixing, an industry veteran. He's worked with Kanye, Drake, Justin Bieber, and a ton of others, and John Greenham on mastering, another industry veteran. It's kind of incredible that we would only see 4 people on such a big pop album. Despite this, they still make an album full of incredible production and unique effects. Out of all of the effects on this album, one stood out to me the most. This thing on Xanny.
I'm in the secondhand smoke, still just drinking canned coke. I don't need a Xanny to feel better.
Something crazy is going on with the vocal here. It sounds like the bass is distorting it somehow. So what's happening? How are they doing it, and why is it here? If we want to figure this out, the best way is to probably recreate it. Now, obviously, we're not going to know exactly how they did it unless someone in the song comes out and tells us. But with some trial and error, we can get pretty close. Here's something that sounds kind of like Xanny. It's got a female voice and a bass underneath. Not perfect, but good enough for what we're trying to do here. I don't have anything that sounds like Billie. If we want to better understand how they did this effect, we can look for other examples at other spots in the album. I managed to find 2. There's this one in Bad Guy.
I'm the bad guy.
And this part of You Should See Me in a Crown also sounds kind of similar. These effects don't have a giant bass, like Xanny, but they still sound similar, so how are they happening? We can get a better idea if we zoom in on the waveform. It looks like the volume is going up and down really quickly while the effect is happening. Changing the volume like this is something called amplitude modulation, and it might not seem like something that could affect a sound that much, but at high rates of speed, it can change how a sound sounds. Let's take a sine wave at a constant volume. We want to change the volume of this signal, and we can do that by applying a sine wave, so the volume changes at regular intervals going up and down. This effect is pretty straightforward, but what happens if we change the volume really quickly? Use a sine wave with a really high frequency. What started as a simple change in volume started to impact how the signal sounded. And if you apply this effect to a vocal, it gives it a choppy, distorted feeling. This gives us a place to start on our example. We need to change the volume of the vocal really quickly. But what's the frequency or the rate that we should change the vocal at? If we go back to Xanny and listen to the effect, it sounds like the rate depends on the bass note playing underneath. The higher bass notes have higher frequencies and make the vocal modulate faster.
Canned coke. I don't need a Xanny.
So the amplitude modulation frequency depends on the bass note frequency. Making this in our example, we need to set the frequency of the modulation to the same frequency as the bass notes, which are C and A. So let's set it to 65 and 55 Hertz. If we put the bass underneath, it starts to sound something like Xanny. With the bass and the amplitude modulations at the same frequencies, it sounds like they're working together. But this doesn't quite sound like the vocal in Xanny. We're still missing a couple things. When the effect happens, the vocal goes into stereo. It sounds like it's all around you.
I'm in the secondhand smoke.
We can recreate this by slightly delaying the left and right channels when the effect happens. It tricks your brain into thinking the sound is all around you. The vocal in Xanny also sounds like it's been distorted. It's really gritty and crunchy. It's hard to tell if it's just on the bass and it's so loud that it cuts through, or if the bass and the vocal are on the same channel and there's some kind of clipping distortion.
Still just drinking canned coke. I don't need a Xanny.
To recreate this, we just need to add some distortion to our example. If we put everything together and add in the bass, it sounds pretty close to what's happening in Xanny. Now that we've made a rough version of this vocal effect, we still need to answer why they would let something through that could almost sound like a mistake. First, there's the discussion of how these effects fit with the theme of the song. Thankfully, we don't have to get too metaphorical. Billy's already come out and told us what everything means.
What does smoke look like? How can we make it sound the way that smoke looks and the way that smoke feels
In your lungs.
in your lungs? And the verses are like what smoke looks like, and the choruses are like what it feels like.
In your lungs, yeah.
Using vocal effects like this is a good way to try and represent things that are hard to express in a song. So cigarette smoke, damaged lungs, and trouble breathing, it all kind of makes sense with the choppiness of this vocal. This effect also kind of subverts the norm in pop music. Typically, the vocal is the main focus of the song. It's out front and you don't want anything detracting from it. An artist like Maroon 5 or Ariana Grande is never going to have something like this on their lead vocal. In fact, they'll probably just double up as many vocal takes as they can to make it as clean and bright and loud as possible. In contrast, Billie is at least somewhat experimental. She's not making ambient field recordings or hardcore industrial hip-hop, but she is trying to at least push against what you would expect in a pop song. And it's always good to hear some experimentation. And that covers Billie Eilish's vocal effect in Zanny, how she did it and why it's there. Let me know what you think of When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go, Billie Eilish, and anything else that you think sounds good. You can find Sound Selection on YouTube, Instagram, or iTunes.